Amanda, and I'm a senior researcher within the Public Health Institute at John Moores University in Liverpool. And I've done a range of research over the years looking at media representations of substance use, including alcohol. So not only marketing, but television, magazines, social media. And I'm particularly interested in the gendered nature of marketing. I didn't touch that then. Gendered nature of marketing and content. And what I'm going to do today is focus on how women are targeted by alcohol marketers, are represented, and some on social media through alcohol marketing. For some reason, flicking through, I'll go back, sorry. I'll also consider the implications for drinking practices, but I want to look at the wider implications for gender relations and the way that we view men and women within society. So I'll draw on a number of pieces of research that I've conducted over the years. So research funded by Alcohol Research UK that focused on social media marketing, a recent study which reviewed the literature on gendered marketing and how women are targeted and represented, and a current project that I'm conducting that's exploring the extent, nature, regulation and impact of gendered alcohol brand marketing within the context of contemporary feminism. So looking at how women are targeted and represented, and considering how marketing is changing in relation to gender and sex in response to the current feminist movement, as well as a wider awareness of social justice issues. So I'll be presenting some early findings of stage 1 today, which is an analysis of 20 alcohol brands on social media and also nightlife venues. And I think it's important there to acknowledge that we tend to focus on brands when we talk about marketing, but nightlife venues are very important and influential, in particularly young people's identity making. And you know, we need to focus on them. Theoretically, they're regulated by the same regulations as brands, but you know, we have a reactionary system of regulation in the UK, and I think when it comes to venues, there's less regulation and less adherence to those regulations. So this research is ongoing. We'll be assessing this, these marketing posts in relation to the Alcohol Standards Authorities Association's codes, also looking at complaints back to them by the public and organisations on the grounds of gender and sex. We'll be doing qualitative work with men, women and other genders. We're taking a very intersectional approach to make sure that it's not just white men and women who are heterosexual that we're doing work with. We want to take a very broad definition and viewing identity as intersectional. There'll be an arts-based workshop, very collaborative, and we'll be doing interviews as well, which is slightly controversial in public health research, but we will be doing research and interviews with people working within marketing. So not just big brands, but people working at local level within venues, nightlife photographers and influencers as well. So just a very a quick bit of background. We know that the gender gap in drinking has narrowed in recent years quantitatively, but I think it's very important to still acknowledge drinking and alcohol use and experiences as very much gendered. It's a way to perform masculinity and femininity, and nightlife spaces themselves remain very gendered spaces, and gendered experiences occur within them. So the reasons for a narrowing in this gap, obviously obvious points, the availability and increased affordability of alcohol, but we need to consider the shifting social positions of women since second wave feminism, and how since then women have entered work employment, we have more purchasing power, therefore more time to spend on brands and to engage in public spaces like nightlife spaces, leisure spaces, where once we were restricted to the domestic sphere, we're now within public spaces. And this means that we're increasingly targeted by alcohol brands and a range of brands. Alongside this, we've also had the increased feminisation of the nighttime environment itself. So gone are the days where nightlife is just dominated by the traditional male pub. I think pubs themselves have become more inclusive of women. We still have them, but we have a range of bars and venues that are there to target women as well as men. I won't touch on this too much, as Alex has already kind of went through, you know, the strong evidence base for association between exposure to marketing and a range of alcohol and variables. But I just want to highlight how we also have an increase in evidence base around the influence of social media marketing specifically, and a range of variables, including initiation and levels of drinking. And I think it's important to acknowledge that social media is increasingly being used by brands as it's a it offers a new way not only to market content, but it provides an opportunity to involve consumers within content creation. So users are encouraged to share, upload, and to share content amongst their peer groups. And this is really significant and important to brands, because that allows them to reach a wider audience, because consumers are sharing their content for them. But also this content is endorsed by the peer group. So people are viewing images that aren't coming directly from brands themselves, but it's coming from their friends and peers online, which means they can be more meaningful. Research that we've done with young men and women has actually shown that this culture of social media and drinking culture online is discussed and seems to be more meaningful to women than men. It might just be the case that young men are more reluctant to talk about this kind of interaction online and the importance of social media than young women, but in our research it was very much something that young women discussed much more than young men. And this type of marketing has led to a blurring of the boundaries between brand and venue content and consumer content. Consumers are involved in uploading photographs and real life events, so sponsorship of music events, sports events, means that consumers are photographed by branded events and also venues, and that content is uploaded. So consumers themselves are being used to market products to other consumers. I think as well it's important to consider that social media allows brands to collect data, quantitative data as well as qualitative data on their consumers through algorithms, as well as asking questions where consumers will then post their responses in terms of preferences, what they like, what they don't, and that can be used in the design of future targeted marketing campaigns. So we know that, as Alex said, there's a strong evidence base for the influence of marketing. We have very little quantitative research around gendered messaging. We have a lot of qualitative work. But I think the important thing to say there is that most marketing is gendered. So the current samples that we're analysing, venue marketing, the vast majority, probably up to 90%, is gendered, whereas brand content, around 2/3, around 70%, is gendered in nature. So these studies that are looking at the extent of exposure and the influence of that on a range of drinking variables, then that content that people are being exposed to is likely to be gendered in nature. So just drawing on the qualitative work around, what are the influences of gender content on drinking experiences, we know there's a high level of engagement. People find gender content appealing, and that gender connotations do inform people's decision making around their drink choice and what they drink and how they drink. So drinks are used to symbolise femininity and masculinity within people's identity making. Men and women choose certain drinks that they feel is acceptable for men and women to consume within society, and have very clear ideas around what are feminine and masculine drinks. A range of research shows that women tend to use the language of nice and pretty and focus on the aesthetics of drinks and marketing when discussing their preferences and their drinking choice. And men generally are less adventurous. Women like to try new things and like to engage with more creative messaging and imagery, whereas men are a bit less adventurous and stick to more traditional imagery. And I think that's reflected in how generally marketing that targets women tends to be a bit more creative and seems to be a little bit more innovative. We also know that the messages around gender roles within marketing appeal to gender roles that exist within society, and also emerging gender roles. So we know that, I think particularly in the last few years, we have a much more open-minded and progressive view within society of what gender is, and brands such as alcohol brands are very aware of that and have begun to use that within their own marketing. So before I move on and draw on a number of examples of these gendered messages, I think it's important just to acknowledge that not everyone accepts these gendered messages. There's lots of work and qualitative work, including my own, that shows how people are able to negotiate and resist these messages within their identity making. And men and women can actually reject these feminine and masculine messages as part of their own identity making, as they want to transgress traditional norms. So just to highlight there that the way in which these gendered messages are interpreted isn't necessarily uniform. In the main, people tend to abide by and reflect these traditional gender rules, but generally people can resist within their identity making as well. So what I kind of want to argue today actually is that, understandably, we tend to focus as public health researchers, sociologists, psychologists, we focus on the influence of marketing on drinking levels and health. And my research does that, and it's a very important aspect. But another aspect that I think we can view also from a public health issue and a gendered and social perspective is the influence that alcohol marketing messages around gender can have on wider gender relations and gender equity. So it's important that we consider how marketing of alcohol, in the same way that other brands do this, but they can reproduce gender stereotypes, some of which might be harmful. They tend to associate alcohol use with sexual availability, particularly of women, and also they use messaging that could be accused of commodifying, objectifying and sexualising women. So it's important, I think, that we consider the context of alcohol use and the public health harms. But we know that, unwanted sexual attention within nightlife environments is a public health issue, it's a gender issue, a human rights issue, as well as, the association between alcohol use and violence against women. We need to consider the messages around gender within marketing and how they may contribute to social norms that might reinforce and excuse some of the behaviours and attitudes that exist in society towards women. So just a few examples, a bit of history. So historically, we know that women were very rarely targeted. When they were depicted in marketing, it was drinking alongside men or serving men within domestic roles. Babycham was one of the first products to target women, and since then we've seen a big increase in the targeting of women. And I'll now go on to discuss a few examples of those from research that I've conducted. So as I said earlier, women are a bit more adventurous in their drink choice and purchasing, and we have a range of products annually that are consistently developed to target women, and there's gender connotations there. So we find that there's a focus on calories, low light drinks to target the female market, which in a way draws on women's anxieties around weight and appearance to sell products. We have a number of fruity and sweet tasting beverages which women and so slim cans that women can drink on the go. They're products that women can easily slip within their handbag, and in any context, wherever they are within their busy lives, they can have this small product there at hand, which is obviously problematic for a whole range of reasons. And a really obvious one, which I'm sure you're all very aware of, but the pinkification of alcohol and feminine packaging. I think it's fair to say that gin has certainly had remarketing. It's got a new image in recent years, and pretty much every spirit and wine brand now has a pink version. And as you know, we know that for some women who like pretty drinks, they like the aesthetics, this is particularly appealing. We also have a range of gender roles and gender connotations, so particularly amongst female targeted marketing, a focus on motherhood through associations with Mother's Day. We have male targeted brands do focus on Father's Day, but they don't really have connotations of fatherhood. It's simply portraying their brand as a potential gift for men, whereas female targeted marketing focuses on this concept of bonding between mother and daughter, but also escaping motherhood. So this concept of me time, relaxation, treating yourself after the kids have gone to bed, that is presented as being achieved through drinking predominantly wine, and we don't have the same comparisons there in relation to fatherhood. Very stereotypical connotations of appearance, fashion and shopping, assuming that, all women like to shop, well, women like clothes, shoes and makeup, very, very prominent within female targeted marketing. And this overlaps with competitions. We know competitions are used on social media across brands, regardless of whether they're targeting men and women, but particularly female targeted brands have a whole sorry, there's something going on with my slides, I keep skipping, but a whole range of female products, fake tan, makeup, nails, drawing on these, you know, societal expectations of a very narrow definition of what beauty is and what femininity is. And something that has emerged from the research so far is most brands now associate their alcohol and their brand and themselves with meals and a range of foods, but particularly female targeted brands focused on you know, desserts, chocolate, cake, and the concept of baking. We have, you know, Bake Off being used to promote brands, and even brands such as Bailey's, which are also redefining themselves as an ingredient to and a baking ingredient as well as an alcoholic beverage, and very prominent by Bailey's, and again framing women within this domestic context of baking and the kitchen almost. And there's always time for wine. So again, time-related marketing very prominent regardless of the gender being targeted, but particularly prominent amongst female targeted brands. So, you know, your usual Wine O'Clock, Thirsty Thursday, Wine Wednesday, Fry Yay, very, very prominent, giving the idea to women that it's fine to drink on every day of the week, and it's fine to drink, you know, it's acceptable to drink at any time of the day. So obviously problems there when we think about, you know, the Chief Medical Officer's guidance and public health guidance around units and frequency of drinking. In terms of the actual social context in which women are presented as drinking, very varied. So we have nights in, bonding with friends, relaxing, nights out, but increasingly brands jumping on this idea of pre-drinking or pre-loading, which my research has shown this is very, very important to young women more so than young men. It's not just a way to drink and reduce the cost of a night out by drinking cheap alcohol before you enter nightlife spaces, but for women in particular, this is a context in which they bond with female friends. They perfect the ideal femininity, the ideal look, sexualized, beautified look that they feel is required to enter nightlife spaces. It's also a context in which they take pictures of themselves to upload to social media, because a lot of them discussed with us how they weren't happy with pictures that were taken on nights out because intoxication led to them not looking as nice as what they'd like. So brands are very aware of the importance of these contexts to women, and are jumping on them and you know, and referring to them to attract female consumers. These contexts also overlap with female friendship. You know, there's nothing wrong with promoting female friendship. Women supporting each other is very, very important. This is something, however, that's lacking from male-targeted marketing. We've kind of moved away, I think, from that idea of lad culture, men drinking and together, sexualising women while they're together. We've moved away from that kind of fosters marketing, and male-targeted brands show kind of mixed sex drinking also now. But in terms of this female friendship theme, it's important because it allows or encourages consumers, women online, to share this content and tag their friends. So it's another way of brand content reaching a wider audience through the peer group. And relationships, a number of relationship statuses, not only focusing on Valentine's Day. Male brands do focus on this to some extent, but certainly not in the same way, not around love, romance. We've also got a focus on singlehood, so the idea that, you know, a woman doesn't have to have a man to be happy, almost with feminist kind of undertones. It's a whole range of messages around love, romance, and also language that isn't necessarily heteronormative anymore. So these messages around Valentine's Day isn't assuming or depicting someone's partner as being the opposite sex, but language is carefully used that doesn't give that impression to appeal to a wider audience of same-sex couples also. Just want to very quickly touch on influencers. We know that, you know, for a range of brands, including alcohol, particularly important. What we found in current research is that when we're looking at brand content, there wasn't actually many influencers. There were some well-known ones, but we were quite surprised, thinking, oh, this isn't actually a theme as much as what we thought it would be. But what we found was that brands might share collaborations with influencers that are well-known, but micro influencers, so small influencers that might be popular in one locality, they might only have 20,000 followers, they're being used much more. And to be able to capture that content and analyse it, you have to look at the influencers' accounts. So the brands aren't sharing it, it's just the influencers. So we had to collect this data in a different way through the use of collecting data through hashtags, as opposed to looking predominantly just at brands and brand pages. but a whole range of influencers, and we know that, you know, these resonate with young women and also young men also. I've got a PhD student that's just completed a PhD looking at health messages by influencers as well as risk behaviours, and it's very, you know, very much something that is important to young people within their online cultures. I want to very quickly touch on the way in which women's sexualities are represented within brand marketing. We know that women and sex has always been used to sell products, including alcohol, a whole range of problematic images here, which thankfully are from the past. But recently we've seen a change, and I think that reflects a change in social environment in which we're very much aware of gender equality. The Me Too movement has shifted the narrative. We're aware of social justice more generally. We've got Camera, who have banned sexist marketing and beers from their events. And this reflects research that shows that attitudes are changing, and that women particularly find this this type of marketing offensive, and therefore brands, particularly beer brands, are realising that they're alienating 52% of their consumer base by focusing on women in objectifying ways. We have new regulations. So, existing regulations around prohibiting brands from associating alcohol with sexual success, although there's evidence that those are breached. But new regulations around gender, not just applying to alcohol marketing, but advertising generally. It shouldn't cause offence on the lines of gender, sexual orientation, shouldn't use gender stereotypes that's harmful, as well as sexualised imagery that's irrelevant to the product. We're yet to know whether these have been effective. We're assessing the effectiveness of these within our current project, but so far brands do seem to be sticking to them, although very kind of vague kind of connotations. What is harmful? Someone's perception of what's a harmful gender stereotype might be different from someone else's, but it tends to be venues that are in breach of these regulations, particularly around sexualised imagery. So what's taken the place of this sexualised marketing? We've got these messages of feminism and gender equality. International Women's Day has become a marketing tool for alcohol brands. We used to have this messaging in the 70s, but during what we might call the post-feminist era of the 90s and 2000s, we moved away from this. But, you know, we have a feminist movement now, a number of feminisms, and I think this is a way for brands to appeal to a new generation of young women that are much more feminist and gender equality aware. A good example is the Smirnoff Equalizer campaign, which is promoting the representation and equal representation within the music industry. A whole range of new beer products, beer brewed by women, brewing being represented as a form of empowerment, and a whole range of new products that we might define as feminist. And the picture there in the bottom right is one that I took in a supermarket in North Wales, where this Boss beer, which is brewed by a brewery in Wales that's run by and owned by a woman, that's been displayed in, I think it was the Spa, alongside a traditional brand that sexualises women. So lots of mixed messages around women's sexuality. We also have messages of transgression and resistance, so the inclusion of women within what we might define as traditionally male activities, and women's rugby, women's Six Nations being sponsored by Guinness, for example, and I think we can compare that to women's football in Scotland that we know has been rejecting sponsorship by the industry, and women in brewing being, including women within the brewing industry is being promoted as a form of empowerment, as well as brands trying to draw attention to gendered messaging around drinks. So, brands calling out gendered messaging, pink marketing. Brewdog had a campaign that kind of backfired, where they were ironically commenting on how women are targeted through pink products. There was a bit of backlash towards that, but very different messages to what we had in the past. Really interestingly, and this is something that we're focusing on in our current work, is how brands, and particularly alcohol brands, are piggybacking social movements. So not just the LGBTQ movement, but Black Lives Matter. We have a whole range of charitable and social justice issues that brands are endorsing and aligning themselves with, and particularly in relation to gender, messages that are transgressing the gender binary, moving away from heteronormative messages to target people people that define themselves through a broader category of gender that moves beyond the binary. We don't really know how this is perceived. We've been looking at comments on such posts. Some people are really pro it, some people see it as tokenistic, and some people, you know, very shocking, of course, marketing posts, people saying they will no longer drink a drink because it's endorsing LGBTQ rights, Black Lives Matter. So it's interesting that, you know, it seems to be working in both ways. It's attracting people, but also receiving some criticism. So is this problematic? Well, we know that these messages are of appeal to men and women through stereotypes, gender norms and gender rules. And, you know, as the saying goes, alcohol is no ordinary commodity. As Alex has discussed, we know this type of marketing has influence. But I want to argue as well that they're problematic in that they're presenting to women a very narrow definition of what femininity is, one that's dominated by appearance and consumption, and one that, if we think about public health concerns more generally, we need to think about body image, and we need to think about a whole range of implications. I think we need to acknowledge as well that there's been positive shifts on a social, you know, in terms of socially, it's good that women aren't being sexualized by brands anymore. It's important to recognise women's empowerment and feminist messages, but we also need to consider how these messages are being used to promote a product that's potentially harmful to women as well. Very, very quickly want to end. I know I've went on quite a bit now, but want to discuss sexualised imagery and how they haven't necessarily disappeared, particularly within nightlife venues. We know nightlife venues are sexualised. They're a context in which gender and masculinity are exaggerated, sexuality is displayed. It's a context in which people meet partners. And we have this term, you know, the pornification of nightlife, where women's bodies have always and continue to be used to promote venues to men, but also to other women through messages of empowerment through sexual agency as well. However, I think we have seen a bit of backlash to some messages that have been objectifying, and here's just a range of marketing messages, particularly by venues that have been banned or withdrawn. And some, you know, we can argue that very problematic messages around entitlement to women's bodies, sexualisation of women, and implications for sexual consent here. However, a really important point I want to make is that venues have moved away, and brands particularly, but venues are also moving away from objectifying women to what we refer to as subjectification, which is self-sexualization. So not just showing women within venue marketing, not just showing their body parts in a way that dehumanizes them, but shows women as sexualizing themselves and an awareness of sexuality. And this is really, really important, as we know that women find this type of messaging less problematic. It's liked, particularly when it's seen as being empowering. So in a way, it provides an opportunity for venues to target men through using women's bodies, but also to prevent themselves from alienating a female audience by showing women self-sexualizing in a way that is perceived by young women particularly as empowering. Crossing over with that self-sexualization, all venues now have nightlife photographers who are instructed and paid to take images of women that fit a certain image, and they're encouraged to act sexually within photos. Now, I'm not judging any woman for acting sexually. I think we just need to think about the way in which potentially men might interpret these messages, and the way in which you know, brands are promoting themselves through women's bodies, and almost in some cases the promise of sex and sexual content within venues. And women generally, you know, this is important within women's identity making. Women, you know, women that we talk to, this is a part of the enjoyment of a night out, and it's not viewed as problematic that they're being used to promote venues. So again, just to consider the implications, particularly of this sexualized content, then we can see it's not necessarily, you know, we know it's not conducive to gender and sexual equality. It's giving the message that it's acceptable to objectify and sexualize women. It's associating alcohol with sexual success, which we not, you know, the regulations would suggest that this shouldn't be done. It's suggesting women are regularly, they're available to men when out drinking, when intoxicated, and that women's bodies are there for male consumption. Now, there's a few commentaries now. There's little research in this area, and the second part of our ESRC studies is focusing on the implications of the marketing that we analyse on these type of issues. But there's a number of commentaries and pieces of research that have discussed the implications for these messages on sexual consent, as well as the way in which they can undermine anti-violence messages, particularly within nightlife venues. So research in the UK, research from Australia, and this isn't necessarily new. We know that women have always been used to promote venues and kind of act as base to attract male participants in nightlife venues. But recent research in Australia has actually shown that online algorithms are actually promoting and prioritising images of women that meet a certain kind of heterosexy ideal, and that nighttime photographers and influencers, female influencers, are paid to capture these images and upload them at certain points throughout the night to actually manage the flow of female and male participants in and out of nightlife venues, to encourage men to enter at the promise of seeing these type of women within their venues. Now, not only is that problematic for the consumption of alcohol within those venues, but obviously it's a way in which, the nightlife environment is experienced by women through the male gaze, and, another example of how women's bodies are commodified to attract male customers. Research as well conducted by a friend and colleague, Dr. Claire Gumby, conducted in Liverpool, also highlighted how sexualised imagery within nightlife venues undermines efforts to end gendered violence within these spaces. And they analysed and evaluated the perception of men's perceptions of an anti-rape campaign within nightlife venues, which was drawing attention to sexual consent when it includes alcohol. And they found that this was very much dismissed. Men found it offensive, and some men actually interpreted and analysed the posters through the lens of sexualised advertising. So just one quote there to show how they said the campaign would have been better if she was prettier and if she had less clothes on. So their conclusion is that this sexualised marketing, whether it's objectifying or self-sexualising, can have implications for sexual consent and gender relations within nightlife. And this is something that when we go on to do our primary research, we'll be focusing on in quite some detail. Also some research and quantitative research from Australia and the US. So one study in California found a significant relationship between the prevalence of sexualized imagery within alcohol marketing within certain nightlife spaces and the level of sexual violence. We obviously can't say that's causal, but still a very important association. And recent research in, I think it's Australia, found an association between people's exposure to sexualised, objectified images of women within alcohol beverage advertising and people's willingness to intervene if they were to view an alcohol-facilitated sexual assault or unwanted sexual attention within nightlife spaces. So again, we can't say this is a causal relationship, but we know that it suggests that these type of messages might be reinforcing certain perceptions of women, which might have implications for gender equity. So I think the main message there that I kind of wanted to get across today was that it's important from a public health perspective that we focus on the impact on drinking, but also from a public health perspective, but as well as a gender and general societal and human rights perspective, we need to consider the wider implications of these gender messages on how we view men and women within society, and how that might influence treatment of men and women. I just want to very quickly end on a shout out to Don't Pink My Drink, which is an online campaign by Professor Carol Emsley up in Glasgow, encouraging people to call out gendered marketing, and that might be problematic. So this is just a number that I've uploaded myself. The cake there is in Liverpool, very, very prominent on social media, a 16th birthday being promoted through alcohol use and the kind of pink Barbie context. One I found yesterday actually when looking for Christmas presents, a way for women to smuggle booze within their bras, and I think highly problematic. This was again another Christmas present website. I think this popped up on Instagram. A champagne flute for young female babies being promoted as a bottle. So really, it's worth looking at, you know, having a look at Don't Pink My Drink, because it wants to highlight not just marketing, media representation, but gifts and the wider kind of consumer climate and culture, and where products and gifts are being promoted around alcohol in gendered ways as well. So thank you very much. I know I've spoke very, very quickly and covered a lot, but more than happy to answer questions and discuss further in the discussion. Thank you.